Hey everybody, it's Cider Week Hudson Valley. Welcome this afternoon. We have this amazing conversation. I'm Scott Ramsey from the New York Cider Association, and I'm thrilled to welcome Gabe Cook, the world famous ciderologist.
Welcome everybody. Good to see you.
Nice. Good to see you as well, Gabe. And Ryan Burk, the world famous head cider maker from Anchory Orchard. So I'm really, really thrilled to have you both here. I've been looking forward to this a lot because, you know, I love sort of traveling internationally and staying sort of on touch with what's going on an international scale. So I really wanted to make sure we had a conversation with some voices from as far as we could get. So Gabe, I'm really, really pleased that you were able to join. I know you and Ryan have a long history, so I'm looking forward to seeing how this conversation goes and hearing all about your perspective on talking tannin.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to let... Yeah. And I want to let everybody know who's watching that you can absolutely comment or add any questions or chat, however you want to engage with the conversation. Just type it into your comment feed and we'll see that. And Gabe and Ryan can respond accordingly. But gentlemen, I'm going to let you guys get to it. I'll be behind the scenes if you need anything, but I'm going to drop off and you guys can just take it away.
All right. Awesome, Scott. Thank you so much. Ryan, good evening, my friend. How are you?
I'm well. I'm relatively good, thank you. And yourself?
So that means you're on tip-top form then. This is good to hear.
Well, yeah, I think it's a bigger question these days than it usually is. So
true.
Yeah, maybe that's a different conversation.
Sure. And I know that there's been as part of the week there've been conversations going down this route too. So it's you know, this is all about conversation and keeping the dialogue going and trying to find a route through these very, very challenging times. I don't suppose we've had anything to try and cope with, you know, anything to compare to this. Certainly in my time in the cider industry and just trying to get through day-to-day life. So
yeah,
we'll defer to something that we know a little bit about, which is cider and tannin. I think it was me who chose the title for the show, as you can probably tell, and I'm talking tannin because it's something that's very dear to my heart, being from you know, from the west of England, classic West Country styles of cider. Very fortunately, innately come with these bold, rich, earthy tannins, and that's the cider that I grew up drinking. It's the cider that I first started to make, and it's what I've been mostly drinking through my life, but also when I first moved to New Zealand, and then latterly drinking lots of ciders in the USA that a lot of them very much come more with more of an acid drive. That I personally really enjoyed that journey, exploring those types of drinks. My personal favorite kinds of wines, for example, are more aromatic, acid-driven wine rather than tannic wine. So to be able to explore that part of things has been really fascinating. But I know that tannin is something that is important to you, Ryan. This has been part of your sort of cider making journey. How and when did you first come across utilizing these kinds of apples?
You might say tannin is one of the things that binds us.
You could say that. Tell us more.
Too much for a tannin joke on a Sunday afternoon?
Oh, I see.
Yes, tannin and tannic ciders have always sort of drawn me in, and is usually the things that I had the most fun making as a cider maker are coming out of ciders that are using apples that are rich in tannin. And for me, that's, you know, a lot of blending and barrel aging and things that take long periods of time and have ebbs and flows on goodness. Maybe sometimes they're sort of off in the middle, and then you wait another year and it kind of comes out and shows itself as something amazing. And so that anticipation and also what it takes to kind of get some of that fruit, especially in the US, is what's endearing about it for me, what keeps me interested in going. So yeah, I would say for me, it's a primary driver for excitement in my job.
Sure. And who were the sort of key people, or what are the sort of key times that where sort of tannin sort of came across your path? Were there some sort of eureka moments or times?
Yeah, all right. I'm going to do everything I can to not mention Tom Oliver.
Failed.
Already here, 5 minutes in, can't
I know.
wait it. Just
Come on,
I
we'll
can't-
give him a tiny bit. He's chortling at home right now. We just know he's snorting away.
Yeah.
We know.
There's nothing I can do. The first tannic ciders I had were in the early mid 2000s. I was in Chicago, so 2006, 2007. There wasn't a lot of European cider, at least from like a farm, call it farmhouse, just for ease of use. Ciders, there wasn't like a lot of excitement or appreciation or attention to those ciders, but they were here. And I was lucky to live in a big city where I had access. And so the earliest ciders that I can remember tasting that were, rich in tannin would be some French ciders from DuPont, as well as some Oliver's ciders from Hereford, UK. So those were my first exposures, and somewhere right around then some Spanish cider as well. But I really did gravitate, not to say nice things about my friend Tom, but I was pulled to those ciders because I was sort of already tasting in that realm with wine, with sour beers. I was really interested in lambic at that time, and so I was really into homebrewing, and I like immediately, a couple years into homebrewing, all I was doing like long-term sour beers, mixed culture beers, fruited beers. And so I was sort of ready to accept what was the Hereford dry ciders at that time, which, were intense and still are. As it turns out, you can still open one of those and it's still interesting, especially the Perry's. Tom and I had a dinner at a place called the Finch in Brooklyn, and we opened up an old Perry, 7, 8 years old.
No worries.
Phenomenal.
Still
yeah. So what about you? I mean, the difference between my exposure to Big Tannin is that it wasn't readily available to me as a drinker. It was I would call it a rarity or a specialty, as opposed to where you grew up, where it's everyday life.
Yeah, it was. I grew up in the village next door to Weston, so enjoyed drinking their drinks. Circa 20 years now, where I was starting my drinking adventure. They were really good ciders back then. Definitely strongly tannic driven, but quite sort of accessible. And then it was going on to visit some of these Herefordshire farmhouse cider makers, Tom Oliver, the Ross and Wise Cider and Perry Company, and just really enjoying the structure and the intensity, just the full flavour kind of experience. And yeah, I was just immensely fortunate that these are the drinks that I just had readily available to me and really, really enjoyed. It wasn't until I think I moved away, I say to New Zealand, and was working for a small producer called Peckham's, who do actually have the largest block of tannic fruit in New Zealand, but also then utilised other dessert fruit too. To be exposed to the cider making process and the flavour profiles of non-tannic fruit. So I probably came from the completely different end of things. And on the one hand, there were certain acid-driven ciders that I really started to grow to love, but I also recognised that those ciders that weren't made with really ripe fruit, that weren't made with good yeast, that were done with sort of real care and skill to create an aromatic and acid-driven drink, had the potential to be sometimes a little bit blander compared to an average cider with tannin that could at least provide you with some semblance of structure, just sort of just coming as standard, as it were. So yeah, I sort of had the opposite effect. And then when I moved back to the UK, just sort of fell back in love, or even more in love with these tannic beasts. But actually grew to understand that my personal preference was more around softer astringency rather than an overt kind of bitterness, and learning more about the varieties as well. And this is where the real kind of joy and excitement is, to understand that there are all these different varieties. That yes, we've got tannic apples that sit in a big group, but there's hundreds of them, and each one of them is entirely unique in the way that it presents aromatically and in the mouth. And that there are some, certainly in the UK. There's probably a handful for me, I think, that do have distinguishable characteristics. Dabinet with this sort of orange, juicy kind of thing. The Arlington Mill with the big, rich. Kingston Black in the UK often produces this sort of slightly medicinal and quite sort of spicy characters. So this is quite exciting when you really do start to notice some individual characters. Brian, I'm a touch thirsty. Do you mind if I open up a bottle? Is that all right?
Sorry.
Open up a bottle. Oh, understood in motion 3. Here we go. You can tell it's from Tom's cellar because it's got what looks like bird shit on it. It's literally out of the cellar yesterday. Tell us about understood in motion 3.
Sure. Once again, Tom. Just can't get rid of him. Of course, nor do I want to. Yeah, so that cider is the third in a running series of collaborations with other cider makers that share similar philosophies, are inquisitive, you know, are interested in having, you know, real and opinionated and informed conversations about cider making and orcharding and, you know, and getting past just the making and into the emotional side of it all. And yeah, you know, so I've done it with Eleanor Leger of Eden, with Kevin Zielinski out in Oregon at Easy Orchards, and then with Tom. And it's a thing that we'll continue to do with other cider makers in the near future. And so that particular one's really exciting. What we've done in each one is to have a piece of as many pieces of our mutual style, orchard, cider, all kind of blended in. And so with the case of Tom, we actually did 2 fermentations, one in Hereford at Tom's place, one in the US. And, you know, we both grow, or we both source Dabinet cider apples grown in our respective locations. So big, rich, orange, juicy tannins, like you mentioned. And then to balance that tannin, we both use our local high acid varieties, which are quite different. In New York, mine's the Northern Spy, and in the UK, it's the Foxwell. So we don't really grow Foxwell here, and Northern Spy is not grown over there. So we sort of have a little difference there, which brings in some, you know, local character. Both of those ciders were naturally fermented, meaning we didn't add any yeast. And when Tom's portion was done, we actually shipped that over to the US. We blended those 2 base ciders together. And then Tom came to the cider house in Walden at Angry Orchard, and we tasted through a few different vintages of barrels, you know, aged in all kinds of different oak. Mostly French oak, but aged in all kinds of different barrels of yew. So some Calvados barrels, red wine barrels, white wine barrels, some brandy, sometimes, you know, first turn for us, sometimes, you know, second or third turn. So just 30 or 40 different ciders. And we just tasted over the course of a couple of days, started to pick our favorite things, blended them together, and it's been motion 3. It's more or less dry. There's a little bit of residual sugar. You know, there's a ton of different apple varieties in there. It's really a complex drink. It's definitely meant to show off, you know, a phenolic nature, for sure. But also a drink that's in harmony. It definitely is in harmony. It's not, and those tannins are, you know, the result of long-term barrel aging. So they're very, you know, the tannins are precipitated. Everything's very rich and juicy and round. Nothing is astringent or bitter. Really, everything is very integrated at this point.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I haven't had. I don't think I've tried this for a year or so, and I think it has sort of grown and shifted and become a little bit broader once again. It's just mellowing into its sort of middle age. And we're talking about phenolics, and this is something that we've discussed once or twice before. Around, obviously, we're talking about tannin being in the mouth, but before we even get to putting something on the palate, It's the full whoosh of the volatile aromatics that these kind of apples then come in to present themselves, which is one of the can be one of the joyous things, can be also be one of the great challenges, and especially when you're doing a wild ferment like this. We've talked before about when somebody, especially coming from the wine world, has a sniff of one of these ciders, very often it seems that they'll be quick to go, Brett, Scott Brett, it's done, nothing there. And actually, like I don't think that has got a hint of Brett in at all. I think that is clean as a whistle, which is really impressive to do because it is wild ferment. But that does not mean that it isn't massively intense of aromatic character. There is like a border that sort of very cleverly and challengingly sits between them. And I think some people conflate or mistake Bretty characters for bold phenolics, and it's part of the education process, I suppose. What do you think?
Yeah, I 100% they do. A lot of the, we can get some similar sort of, call it band-aidy phenolics out of, the tannic rich, bittersweet and bitter sharp apples. No question. They can be similar to the smell of a Brett fermentation or infection, depending on your personal opinion. And so, yeah, they are often misidentified, and that rings true in wine too. So yeah, I don't know for sure, but I don't believe the cider has any Brett in it. However, it does present some phenolic, it's pretty light phenolic, whack of, call it, sort of band-aidiness or smokiness. Again, that would be conflated with Brettanomyces. And so I believe it comes from the apples in this particular cider, mostly because there's some residual sugar in this, and it, after 3 years, it's still there, which says to me this is bottled, quote unquote, very clean. And I feel pretty confident it'll stay that way.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. And, this is one of the joys. So in terms of the apple varieties that the tannic varieties you've had the opportunity to work with, are there any that really come to the fore that you love working with, that you love tasting, or that you like but you don't have the opportunity to work with?
I mean, I sort of have two deep loves in cider besides the work that we're doing in New York State in the Northeast, and up and down the East Coast, and really in the States, to establish cider with some culture associated with it. I would say that's my number one mission, is to participate at a high level in that conversation and, that establishment. After that, my other two loves are, one, British West Country cider apples. I just have an affinity for them. It's what drew me in. It's my first several cider visits were spent in the West Country, in Hereford, certainly in Somerset too, to a lesser extent Devon, and so I'm just like, I love those flavors. I love those aromas. I'm hooked. I actually was just reading a book called Drunken China, and they're talking about Baijiu, the national spirit, the #1 selling spirit in the world. Like, I've never even tried it before, and they talk about this taste threshold, that like everything has a taste threshold, right? It's like, takes you 3 or 4 beers before you like beer. It takes 5 or 6 cups of coffee. Every food and drink has a taste threshold, but once you get there, you're hooked, right? And I would say a lot of West Country cider, especially 10-ish years ago when I was first trying them in the West Country, lots changed. So the cider industry has changed. Quality has stepped up. A lot of things have changed. In that time, I would say, there was a higher threshold for those kinds of drinks, maybe 10 or 20 or 30. And then once you're there, once you get it, then that's it. And so I've been on it since the first couple times. So I love that kind of tannin, and for that reason, at Angry Orchard, where we've got a 60-acre orchard, where we've turned it over from traditional the traditional American grocery store varieties to more European cider varieties, and I would say 70% of that orchard is English bittersweet, and most of that is Yarlington Mill.
Yes.
And Dabinet. Those two apples really just speak to my cider making style and how they allow me to do the things I like to do in the cellar. You know, in the primary cellar and the secondary cellar, meaning in oak, generally secondary, and long-term aging. I just really like the way that it develops for me. Yeah, and the other second one is Spain and Spain's cider culture and Spain's cider making style. And so while I don't have any yet in the coming year, since you asked about what I would like to work with, is the Spanish varieties, which, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but probably they're precursor varieties to the English varieties based on the flow of apples and culture. So I'm very excited to get my hands on those varieties from Cornell. This 2022, we'll be planting a pretty wide variety. Yeah.
Awesome. That's really exciting. And you mentioned Dabinet and Yarlington Mill. They're two very popular varieties over here with smaller cider makers and large cider makers too. Dabinet is the most widely planted cider apple variety by larger commercial producers, the Westons, the Thatchers, the Bulmers as well, because they got the tannin, they crop quite proficiently, and with good pruning you can get them into a decent regular pattern too. So they got that magic mix there. And yeah, with the Dabinet, the slightly punchier tannin, and with the Yarlington Mill, it really is one of my favorite apples too. It will only ever improve any blend that it goes into with that breadth and that just richness, that oiliness to it. Absolutely amazing. Yeah. You're talking about you're planting up more, which is really exciting, and we're having this conversation because we're two fans and we're in a position to drink, and you make a bit, and I make 50 liters of cider a year. Watch out, Ryan, I'm coming after you. But crucially, does the consumer know, care, or want tannin ciders?
Yeah, so it sort of depends on how you approach the question, I guess. There's a couple ways that I look at it. Do they know about it, and then ask for it? Generally, no. Are there cider nerds? Am I one of them? Are you one of them? Are there a bunch, especially around where I am and where you are, that do understand it? I'm just going to speak generally across the United States. Generally, no. However, that doesn't mean that they don't enjoy it, right? So I always like to talk about our flagship cider, as this question comes up a lot, right? Our flagship cider, Angry Orchard Crisp, #1 selling cider in the U.S. And it is on any given year between 30 and 50% high tannic cider apples. So does the average drinker of Angry Orchard Crisp understand that? No, they don't. But do they drink it and do they reach for another one? Generally, yes. And so tannin, is kind of like tannin when done well and done right and done with intention to make a balanced drink. It's kind of like, umami in the sense that it brings in that likability, that desirability, and that quest for more, a satisfaction, right, and harmony. And it can, when used that way, if a drinker knows it's there or cares to ask another question about what makes that happen, then I think it's on the cider makers to educate, and ciderologists to educate, the drinkers to get more excited and start to look at varieties and all those things. But I think at a base level, if it's providing enjoyment and bringing people to the category, then that's what I really care about. The finesse, it's also what's exciting as a cider maker. So, as we said in the beginning, it's what kind of keeps me interested, keeps me going, keeps me wanting to make cider and play around with it, because it allows all these cool blending opportunities to make interesting drinks.
Yeah. And then,
how about where you are? You know, in the land of the most drunk cider, you know, do you think people reach for these varieties, and do they care?
No. In the main. So the UK in 2019, the UK sold 783 million litres of cider. I don't know what that is in gallons given.
Wow.
Divided by 3.5, something like that. 200 million gallons or something like that.
Yeah.
It's quite a lot. And I would suspect that maybe 1%, maybe 0.5% of those people really actually cared about knowing what varieties were in there. But that's not their fault. It's just that the UK cider industry has never endeavoured to really talk about the apple varieties that go in there. As you say, they utilise them. We've got them. We're growing them. The ciders are the most popular mainstream brands within the UK are made, at least in part, with fabulous bitter sweet and bitter sharp apples. Because that creates the flavor profile that creates structure, even with accessibility. But that isn't particularly kind of advocated to the consumer, and I think that's a shame. But also it means that smaller producers who really are endeavouring to try and advocate the varieties that they're utilising and how and why they're kind of different. At the moment, it's hard to sort of try and get the consumer to understand that. People know that cider is made from apples, but they wouldn't consider that different apple varieties kind of give different tastes. So we're at the start of our cider journey, and ACA and with the likes of all you guys working together, you're already making really, really good ground on creating language and stylization. It's not perfect. It won't be if you're trying to catch up with, which we are, with beer and wine. Well, they've got a few hundred years head start on us. We're not going to have this nailed within a decade. It's going to take years, and it'll change, and we'll disagree. But at least it gets the conversation going. At least it's trying to give the consumer some bit of information. So it's that sort of openness and transparency, and just telling people what it is that they're drinking is something that an increasing number of producers are starting to do, because there are curious consumers out there. The big thing for cider in the UK is not trying to tap into the people who already drink cider. It's to try and tap into people who don't. And certainly with those who are into beer, or anybody who's in sort of the craft beer crowd, they're interested in the hops. They're interested in the yeast strain or the malt bill. And it's exactly tell them what goes into this cider and how is it made, and that can link to them. So we're getting there. We're moving.
Yeah, I know beer sort of beer has just an inherent ability to pull people in a little better than we do. And right now certainly in London, the Northeast IPA, the hazy juicy IPA is king. I mean, it's king here. It's king across the country. And that sort of people don't even need to know they generally don't know what the hops or the grains. They don't know anything about the yeast or the fermentation. They just know hazy juicy, and it brings them in, and they'll try all of them and drink many of them. And I would say there's plenty of hazy juicy in the cider industry. In fact, most of it. And how as an industry can we kind of harness some of that excitement in the same ways is a question that I'm sort of always asking. How can we focus in on the simple ingredients of our drink, like brewers have? Hops, yeast, grain, that's it. In most cases, sometimes people are putting whatever to make those beers hazy. But let's say generally, how can we do the same thing with cider with just apples or pears without having to add anything else but, apples and yeast, pears and yeast, to get people to think the same way about it and just be like, oh yeah, hazy juicy, got it. I'll have that. It can be tough to get the same effects with the same amount of work and the same, same descriptors and the same more or less very similar drinks.
Of course. I mean, although sort of very largely in our respective markets, cider is generally viewed and consumed more like a beer. Yeah. It isn't a beer. You don't brew cider. You make cider. It's a fruit fermentation. The process, which is what the consumer doesn't see, of course, gives considerable challenge and limitations as to how you can do those kinds of things. Cider, from a production point of view, shares considerably more with wine than it does with beer, but its mode of presentation and pack and serve, apart from the things like this, which are an ode and a step and a move towards wine, although actually this is probably something that's more like a Belgian beer, probably actually. So there are these places where it kind of crosses over. But I think what cider is starting to do is find its kind of voice and its identity a bit more. Is that although we do want to try and tap into some of those consumers, because they are, they have got spend, they are interested in where their food and their drink comes from and how it's made. We don't want them to say, well, here's a sort of something that a beer consumer quite like. Is that here's a whole new drinks category that you might not know anything about yet, and guess what? It's amazing, and it's got as much variation, differentiation of style, of temperature, of glassware, of occasion, of food as any other drink, and they just don't know it yet. And that's what always kind of excites me. I always think like I'm in on the joke, but just because we're here already and just waiting for everybody to catch up. Maybe they won't. I don't know, but I feel privileged and lucky to be at that point. Which brings on to the last bit around just the circling and finishing on our tannin talk here. Being two fans of tannin and people who made and consumed tannin for a long time, are tannic ciders inherently better than those ciders that don't have tannin within them?
Yeah, I mean, no and yes. No, it's about preference, and as cider makers, the goal is creating hospitable drinks. We want people to enjoy the drinks. And so it's good to have a range of offerings to people when they say come to your tap room or go to the store. So, some people have had, back to the Baijiu analogy, some people have had the opportunity to dig in and they're looking for it and they want it and they're tuned in and turned on. So to those people, high tannic ciders might be quote unquote better, but they're not necessarily the ciders that bring people to the yard. And so I think it's about balance, and I think it's about making, showing the diversity of apples and apple fermentation and what we can do with it. And I have single variety non-tannic ciders that I make that I love just as much as the high tannic ciders. So no, I don't think one is better than the other. I'm always trying to think, can I find a way to say that it is? But even if I say, I want to talk about food in cider, it's like, well, I can find the right food to pair with the right cider. So in that case, we can find food that welcomes a high tannic cider and food that rejects it. And when it rejects it, we can, pull in a high acid single variety Newtown Pippin cider, for instance, that's more elegant and mineral driven and acid driven. And so it's all about preference and opportunity and occasion and spending the time to figure out what makes the most sense in those places.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Although let's say if I was given a choice, if I had one cider left to drink from the rest of my life, it probably would be something that was more tannic driven, just because that's my personal preference, and maybe because that's what I grew up with. It's a bit more sort of deeply rooted. But I have, over the last 3-4 years of spending time, especially in various parts of the US, I just loved, and actually especially Pennsylvania and New York, getting to know the varieties that have been sort of classically grown around there, the more of the heirloom type varieties. You mentioned Newtown Pippin, one of my favorites. Golden Russet. I love Golden Russet. I love the aromatics on it. I love the texture. I like the punchy alcohol. I like that minerality. I absolutely adore it. It's absolutely one of my favorite favorite apple varieties to make cider from, full stop.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of people in Devon and Somerset and Herefordshire who would obviously only say that one should or could make cider from tannic apples, and so they should say that because that is the culture and the heritage. It would like me asking somebody from Asturias to say that that the best cider wasn't made from their apples. That would be absolutely ridiculous. I like there is pride around regionality from some people.
Sure.
And then people.
I support that, and I love that. It's one of the things that's interesting. But I also, I don't like missing out or not innovating on something, right? And it's kind of like, wine would never do that, right? It's not just like all wine must be made from high tannic, Pinot Noir. If wine did that and it was all Pinot Noir, then it would be boring. And so for me, I'm like, yeah, I do respect the regional pride is very important, and it's the romance that brings people like you and I in and keep looking and traveling and exploring and coming in contact with new culture, which is one of the beautiful things about cider. And in those excursions, both you and I and our industry that travels and interacts with people, we're always finding something new, right? Each country kind of has a different spin. Every region has a different spin. And, I think predominantly that's not high tannic cider, right? So
absolutely. For me, it's been the revelation for the last year for me has been about Norway, which is very much more acid driven and really highly aromatic as well. Gorgeous, amazing, but no tannin ostensibly. So I completely agree that it isn't a case of better. That was more of a devil's advocate kind of question. So there we go. Tannin dusted. Ryan, I don't know whether you've been able to see any questions at all. I can't see any on my screen.
I saw some questions, but we also answered them just by flow of the conversation. So.
Oh, well, there we go.
Yes.
Easy. Happy days.
Maybe we'll wrap this up then. I get the feeling that Gabe just canceled.
It looks like he just dropped off. I guess that's the end of the conversation.
All right. I guess I'm just standing here by myself.
Never. You're never alone. Never alone. That was great, actually. And I really loved what y'all were saying about, hopefully Gabe, there he comes. There's back in.
Sorry.
So I guess we're just done, Gabe. That was it.
Not a computerologist, apparently.
No, I was just going to comment on, right, exactly. I was going to comment on, I get really excited when I think about, one of the things that attracted me to come to work with the association was this opportunity of sort of, crafting this really singular space for cider, that it's not a beer, it's not a wine, it has its own category. And I, not for nothing, but I think the current environment gives us even more opportunity to kind of think about that. And as we look to move forward, and what does that mean? And certainly from, a New York State perspective, that localization of something that you're enjoying and the product that you're enjoying and the cider that you're drinking, I think is going to be something that's really special to people. And I wonder, Gabe, in your part of the world, I don't know enough about ciders where you are. Is it that same type of really precise localization? Does that exist, or is it more broader across the region?
It's a little broader, let's say what is, from a cider perspective, what would be termed the West Country goes from Northern Herefordshire, which is almost kind of, border Wales, West Midlands, goes all the way through Bristol, all the way down to the tip of Cornwall and almost venturing into the southeast. So in real terms, it's not a particularly big geography. It wouldn't be as big as New York State in any way, shape or form. But the subtle nuance of maybe if there were, but as soon as varieties started getting spread and getting utilized around and about, we probably lost that. There are some varieties that didn't become more commercially popular and that were raised and utilized in specific counties or areas, and sometimes they stay just in that area because there was no reason for them to have grown. But we didn't get on to talking greatly about terroir, but you know, if there was a Davenet made in Herefordshire versus one in Somerset versus one in 3 parts of Somerset versus Devon, I wouldn't be able to say it was from there. There are too many other permutations, it seems, around the cider, largely the cider maker intent, that sort of has major impact over the presentation of that cider. So there are still some customers and some varieties that are more associated with certain regions, but yeah, it's a bit more of a broader spectrum.
Yeah, I look forward to learning more about that. Sounds
Come on
amazing.
over.
So my last question for you all, like, I'm a bit of a dreamer, and I, always like to think about, if I wasn't here right now, where would I want to be? So my question for you is, if you could be enjoying any sort of cider experience anywhere in the world besides where you are, and I'll put another caveat that it has to be outside of the country that you're in, just because I'm a big fan of international travel. Like, where would that be?
Oh, good question. I would go pay a visit back to New Zealand. I haven't been back for a few years. It's a beautiful place if anybody has or hasn't gone. And the guys who I used to work for, they're called Peckhams. They're based at Nelson, top of the South Island, and they're brilliant. They're making some of the best ciders in the world, and they're really innovative and creative, and they're working really hard to try and elevate the game in that country. Maybe they've got a soft spot because I used to sort of live and work there, but it's a beautiful landscape, and having one of their great ciders kind of on the beach is a pretty good place to be, I suspect, right now. Yeah,
that sounds perfect. Ryan, how about you?
Asturias, Spain would be my go-to. I know Asturias has really the only true cider drinking culture. They might drink cider in many countries. Well, they drink cider in many countries, and they might drink a lot of cider, but it doesn't have, it's not attached to culture in the same way. It's inseparable. And in the streets of the, Oviedo and Gijón, cider is ubiquitous, especially when, food is involved. You can see bottles of, cider being poured over people's heads. You look left, you look right, every single day of the week. They drink more cider per capita there than anywhere. It just is inseparable from the local culture. So I hope one day we can say a similar thing about at least New York State, if not further afield. And so going there is really inspirational to that idea to me. And I'm always looking at, what they're doing and how we can, replicate with respect here in the States. So yeah, I feel very attached to that culture.
Sounds like an awesome model.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, gentlemen. Well, this has been really, really awesome. Thank you both so much. I want to do a shameless plug for you both. So I'll start with Gabe. I just got the copy of Ciderology, which
you will have no problem sleeping tonight, my friend. Enjoy.
As soon as I wrap up Cider Week, this is the first place I'm going. I'm looking forward to it. It's really awesome. So what else? I'm listing your website there on the bottom of the screen, and we'll put it in the description of the video as well. But anything else you want to talk about that's coming up for you or that you're up to?
For me, I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's anything massive in the pipeline. For me, it's about trying to navigate my way through the restrictions around sort of COVID, all the face-to-face activity that I really enjoy, and as part of has been my sort of business model till now is having to change, and so looking for new ways and means of getting in touch with my consumers. But yeah, hopefully something coming next month. So just keep eye on all the social channels. You'll see what's going on.
Fantastic. Excellent. Like I said, we'll list all those social channels in the description of this video. So feel free to click away and join where you can. And so Ryan, how about you? What's coming up for you?
Oh, I don't have a book.
You got to work on that, Ryan. Come on.
Yeah. All the good names are taken. What's new for us? We are starting to slowly open at the Cider House in Walden, which we're really excited about. A lot of changes there. We've been in construction for a few months. I'll sort of leave it there. It's going to be, when we reopen fully, it's really going to be a special place to drink cider. I mean, it already was. I think we put a lot of thought into where we're going, and I'm excited to share that with people. The team is awesome, and we've done, collectively a really good job on, driving the future of cider for us. So, and hopefully within our state. So that's happening, and we're just gearing up for a really heavy crop. This is going to be a good apple year. So we will get to cider making here really soon, which
excellent
is always the best part of the year.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I can't advocate enough for people to go and visit you guys out in Walden. The campus there is just stunning and always just joyful and fun to be at and beautiful. And I'm really excited to see the new space once the construction's done. Sounds like it's going to be amazing. Yeah,
it'll be cool. I think the first weekend after the 4th of July, right in there somewhere, we're getting pretty close. I don't know. I don't want to say a hard date. It'll be on our social channels. People, a little bit closer to it than I. So yeah, stay tuned there, and the details will come.
Wonderful. Excellent. We'll have all those in the description as well, so you can join in, link up with Angry Orchard there and Ryan. So thanks again, gentlemen. This is really awesome. I really do appreciate your time, Gabe. Thanks so much. I know you're in Devon, so it's much later there. So thank you for staying up a little bit later on a Sunday night, maybe.
No worries, my friend. No worries. We go to bed straight away. It's nearly 8 o'clock. So yeah.
Nice. I have some good bedside reading for you if you need to borrow a copy.
Enjoy.
It's definitely it's a useful book.
It is. It's multi-purpose.
Yeah.
I think you're quoted in here, aren't you, Ryan? It's like, it's useful. That's your quote.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Nice.
All right.
Thank you all so much.
Facilitating.
It was really awesome. Thank you both very much. And we will see you all later. We have a dinner date tonight with Glenwood and executive chef Suzanne Cups from 232 Bleecker. That's starting at 6:30. So join us there. Tim Buzinski from Artisan Wine is pairing up some wines with the dinner. So we're going to broadcast that live at 6:30. So we'll look forward to seeing you all there. And thanks again, Gabe and Ryan. This has been really, really awesome.
Pleasure. Cheers, guys. Thanks, everyone.